Welcome back to the program. A young reformer or an entrenched military man at 42 is the youngest leader in Africa, even as discussions continue surrounding the new top man in Ethiopia. The first from the Oromo ethnic group that has been at the forefront of anti-government protest, Dr. Abiy Ahmed made his first trip to Kenya, where he held bilateral talks with President Uhuru Kenyatta. But the talks comes at a time when the second most populous country in Africa is still in a state of emergency, with thousands of refugees still in Kenya's territory. Will the new leader bridge ethnic divisions in Ethiopia? What are some of the tech homes for both countries during his visit to Kenya? Joining me in the discussion tonight, I have Professor Peter Kagwanja, the CEO of Africa Policy Institute. He's also a scholar from the University of Nairobi. We also have Abel Oyeyo, who is a foreign relations expert, as well as Hassan Kuchore, who is a researcher, Northern Kenya and Southern Ethiopia. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Prof, let me begin with you. Ethiopia is always said to be an emerging economy, one of the fastest growing economies, not just in Africa, but in the world, averaging about 10% almost every year since 2010, 2011, thereabout. And Kenya is also another country that has a huge potential. How will these two countries, stand to benefit if they work with each other properly?
Kenya and Ethiopia have had long-standing relationship. For many years, the relationship has centered on security concerns, but it has, in the last 5 years, moved towards economic, partnership, and that brought what we call bilateral, commission, which is a special relationship between Ethiopia and Kenya, and we've seen that. They're huge kind of relationship. If you just look at the traffic of human beings moving from Nairobi to Addis Ababa and vice versa, it's huge. Over and above that, the issues of energy. Ethiopia is producing energy in the new stations, hydroelectric stations, and therefore Kenya would acquire that. It's a huge market for Kenya with over 90 million people, potentially one of the largest markets in Africa, and at the same time, it is a ready market for Kenya's manufactured goods, which can be sold in Ethiopia. Therefore, the two countries, if they implement to the full the bilateral treaties or arrangement, are going to benefit greatly, particularly under the new environment of stability in both Ethiopia and Kenya.
Prof, we're going to go into the details of these deals between Kenya and Ethiopia shortly. But Abel, from an international relations point of view, from that perspective, it seems these two countries have had, nothing short of a rosy relationship.
Yes. Kenya and Ethiopia go a long way. Like the president mentioned earlier, Ethiopia was very instrumental in the fight for independence in Kenya. Ethiopia supported Kenya in the 1960s, and I think that made it easy for us, to attain independence. So, as you know, Ethiopia was not colonized. They beat the Italians. And since then, it's not been just about security. We've had so much together, so much in common. There's always been trade, as much as it's been almost one-sided. It's Kenya which has always, sold more goods to Ethiopia. And as you can remember, in 2012, there was a special status agreement between Ethiopia and Kenya. So I think what happened today is not per se a reinvention of the wheel. It's a familiarization process for the new Prime Minister to get to know, the President, and the President to get a chance to know him, so as to advance what has already been, established. Yeah.
And it seems he's getting a lot of goodwill. Kenya is the third country he has visited. Initially, he has visited Djibouti and Sudan, I believe. Now, Hassan apparently is a researcher from northern Kenya as well as southern Ethiopia. Now, Hassan, if you look at the agendas of Dr. Abiy's visit to Kenya, it's all about, strengthening integration, multilateral cooperation. I mean, trade is somehow seems to take center stage. But as someone who comes from northern Kenya, do you think the refugee issues have been sidelined?
Not particularly, because one of the people that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, has met is the governor of Marsabit County. And that is, of course, deliberate, because Marsabit shares, the longest border with Ethiopia. And in the recent past, the ethnic tensions in Ethiopia have spilled over into Kenya, And as we speak, and actually coincidentally, as Dr. Abiy Ahmed and Governor Muhammad Ali were having that meeting, the violence erupted on the Moyale side of the border. So that basically tells you how security, not only trade, but issues of security and politics are shared across these borders, and there have to be, shared strategies and solutions to solve some of these long-standing ethnic tensions.
Now, Prof, I'm sure you understand that stability and development go hand in hand. And from Hassan's point of view there, security is still a major concern, especially in southern Ethiopia. Do you think this is something perhaps that the two leaders, that is Ethiopia's Prime Minister and Kenya's President, can perhaps discuss as well, as much as they're going to talk about trade?
I think the question of security along the Kenya-Ethiopia border is a primary issue. And I'm sure it's something that is, going to become to be a major issue of discussion. You remember that in 2015, Kenya and Ethiopia signed a bilateral agreement as part of what has been called the cross-border integrated management program, not only to deal with the questions of peace building and conflict resolution, but also to enable Kenyans and Ethiopians to enjoy amenities across the borders. That has enabled food supply for both parts. It has enabled, a relative peace. If you compare what has been happening before then and what is happening now, you can agree that there has been a relative stability compared to the past. And I think what needs to be done is to deepen that cross-border integrated program. And it is within that framework that response to the refugees has been better than it has been in the past. It is at the same time the implementation of the county system or devolved government system in Kenya is basically uplifting the lives of people in the country to the extent that facilities like medical facilities are available to both Kenyans and Ethiopians. And I think growing prosperity shared by the communities around is going to reduce tension. And I think focus should be on raising the standards of living within that area in order to kind of drain the swamps of conflict that has affected the region.
Yes. Now, Abel, this brings to question, of course, Ethiopia, I've already said, has had, some sort of sustained economic growth, and we've seen a lot of unrest in the past. Now, with the new leader in place, it seems things have stabilized, apart from the border region that Hassan has been talking about earlier. Do you think the new leader now has all what it takes to, change that country?
Well, I think he comes to office with a lot of goodwill. Number one, he has a very serious background. He's gone to school very well, and he seems to be very much aware of what is required of him as a leader in a country that has had a lot of conflict in the past. Then number two, of course, he seems to be having a lot of goodwill, again, which is based on where he comes from, which is ethnic, of course. He's an Oromo. And for a very long time, the Oromos have not produced a prime minister. So there seems to be some kind of satisfaction that what has always been, the desire of so many Ethiopians has now been fulfilled. And because of the culture of, economic advancement, which I think has taken root in Ethiopia, he gets to inherit an economy that is already on the move. So what he's come to do, I think, in Kenya is to, number one, address the issue of refugees. I think that is why, as Hassan pointed out, he went ahead and met the governor of Moyale so as to make sure the Ethiopians who are here as refugees, of course, are taken care of. And that is, of course, an assurance to them that the government, his government now, minds them, it thinks about them, and measures are being put in place to take them back. And, of course, based on what we know in terms of trade, he wants, of course, to make sure there is what we call a constant flow of items of trade which are very, very instrumental in Ethiopia. Actually, when it comes to economic development, Kenya has so much to learn from Ethiopia. They've invested in infrastructure very well, and I think corruption is a bit low. That is why they're making the kind of gains they're making.
Yeah, we're going to talk about governance issues shortly, Abel. But Hassan, there's something Prof has mentioned about the cross-border integrated program. This is something that people say has a potential of promoting peace and development in that part of the world. But with regards to the tension along the border of these two countries, I understand there were even flare-ups earlier today. Do you think if and abetted, if people don't care about security along this region, then this kind of cross-border integrated program can also be affected?
Certainly, I mean, that integrated cross-border initiative is unprecedented, particularly in the peripheral area of both states. I mean, northern Kenya has obviously been marginalized for a long time, and so has been, southern Ethiopia from the political center. So this is a new beginning in which both countries are trying to invest in previously, unproductive, quote-unquote, regions. And this is, most welcome. I mean, the LabSet project has been there. Isiolo-Moyale highway has now been tarmacked, and there's a renewed sense of optimism, as the professor has alluded to tonight. But certainly there are political issues. The economic aspects, the idea of draining the swamp of poverty and empowering the people, devolution also economically empowering people is a potent point. But once issues of identity, issues of ethnicity, and how that connects to the national politics are not resolved, then I think we will be burying our heads in the sand. Mm-hmm. And as you had pointed out earlier, Yusuf, Dr. Abiy has a particularly monumental challenge because he is an Oromo, and some of the flare-ups we are seeing is in the eastern region, where the Oromo and between the Oromo and the Somali regional states. So as an Oromo, being in charge of the federal state, Dr. Abiy has to move in and contain this violence and still be seen as impartial. So being an Oromo and trying to move into the Somali Oromo fields is particularly going to be challenging, considering also the fact that Dr. Abiy himself has been catapulted into power through this ethnic entrepreneurialism. So I think, will he stand with his Oromo folks, or is he going to provide a national leadership that is going to see, diffuse some of these ethnic tensions from Moyale, all the way to Dirodawa, 1,000 kilometers north. So it's not an easy task, certainly, in terms of the regional coverage, yes, and in terms of the level of violence between the police, the regional police, and the militias that is going on currently.
Yes, but at the moment it seems is getting a lot of goodwill from these leaders, especially in the East African region. Now, Prof, as a react to Hassan's point of view there, it seems the cross-border integrated program you've been talking about is taking shape. At the moment, we're getting a report that the construction of the one-stop border post in Moyale is complete on the Kenyan side and almost 95% complete on the Ethiopian side. And we all know that, violence is also, the cause of violence is always about, resources and all these issues. Do you think with this kind of a program, chaos and violence in these border town areas might come to an end?
I think the best thing is to start by looking at the broader context within which this cross-border integrated program is occurring. First and foremost, you look at who Abiy Ahmed is and what he's bringing onto the table, and what the Kenyan side of the divide is also bringing onto the table. It is said that he's an Oromo and he's coming to power through that ethnic push, Oromo. But I think we need to get deeper than that. He came to power through a major vote by both the Oromo and the Amhara, meaning he's really having a supermajority in terms of opinion support. And he himself moved beyond that and sought to consolidate the Tigrayans by basically preaching the gospel of reconciliation at the national level. He's young and he's also ambitious, and he has a lot of goodwill. Down in Kenya, we have President Uhuru Kenyatta, who has just been elected for the second term. He's implementing an ambitious, a big four, agenda, and therefore Ethiopia meets Kenya at the level of development. And that's where the integrated cross-border program is coming in, supported by the UN, supported by the international community. And I think what needs to be happen is that Kenya and Ethiopia need to honor their earlier promise that they will put money from their treasuries in order to uplift these border areas, and therefore they become the magnet of new development. What we see is that from Addis Ababa to Moyale, the road is complete, and from Kenya, Nairobi to Moyale, the road is complete. Therefore, in terms of infrastructure, we have what it takes to literally transform this area into a magnet of development. And we have already seen facilities like medical facilities. You go to Moyale, I was there just about a year ago, and you find new supermarkets, things you never even dreamt would be found there. It is now taking about 7 hours to move from Nairobi to Moyale, whereas previously it would take about 3 days plus. Meaning we have what it takes to literally boost this area if the two treasuries, if the two governments decide to plow in resources to uplift these marginal areas.
And Abiy, before I come to you, Hassan, I'd like you to react to this. And perhaps, do you think this kind of a program, the cross-border integrated program everybody's talking about, do you think this kind of initiative might bring sanity back to these border towns?
Yusuf, you're talking about a border of more than 500 kilometers. And what we have right now, the cross-border program, is in Moyale. Yet, you know, it's not only in Moyale that we have seen this level of violence. Every so often, there's, high militarization of the border areas, particularly during elections on the Ethiopian side. And these attacks kind of spread along the border. So how, a very kind of pointed and targeted cross-border program that is targeting only trade in Moyale area is going to, improve the general peace and security along the border is, I think, to expect a lot from such a project. It's not that I am being pessimistic about the project. It certainly is improving, trade and development. Infrastructure has been spurred by some of these initiatives. But the broader question is really, is it just a developmental problem, or is it a problem of politics, a problem of identity? And are we going to see programs that are particularly going to target these things? For example, how are you going to resolve the impasse in the eastern region between the Somalis and the Oromos? I think having that cross-border program will only affect Moyale. But you are talking about, a distance of about 1,000 kilometers, all the way north to Diradawa. All these areas are polarized along, Somali, Oromo regional states. So it's not just a cross-border thing. The internal dynamics in Ethiopia themselves can undermine some of these cross-border initiatives. So as long as, for example, there's no peace in Marsabit County, certainly, there will be a spillover into Ethiopia, regardless of the kind of cross-border program that's there. If there's a problem, that emanates as far north as, as I pointed out in Diradawa, it can always spill over down to Moyale. So I don't know how the border, concentrating just on the border and ignoring the wider politics and peace and security.
Clearly, Hassan, there's some deeper problems there. Yes, Hassan, we appreciate your point of view. I think you've delivered your point there. We're almost out of time, Abel, and perhaps can you, let me bring you back to the man of the moment, the man people have been talking about throughout, and that is Dr. Abiy and his visit in Kenya. Of course, there are those who are saying that this kind of a visit is meant to cement Kenya's, key foreign policy, which is some sort of, Afrocentric kind of foreign policy. Abel, people have been fighting about, accountability in Ethiopia. They've been, up in arms about human rights abuses. They've been talking about the release of political prisoners. Final question: do you think he has all it takes to change Ethiopia?
I believe actually he has what it takes to transform Ethiopia. When you look at his record from the time he served, from the, his history is about service to the country. And now the biggest, I think, asset he needs is goodwill, which he has. So with the support he's likely to get from especially the East African region, he can transform Ethiopia. And then, of course, I expect the rest of the world, beyond Africa, to also support his initiatives. He's already, of course, released a couple of political prisoners. That is a starting point. And I think even internally within Ethiopia itself, there's a lot of goodwill because the majority of the population in Ethiopia felt like Oromo had been left out for a long time. So now there's some kind of contentment. So every step it takes to move Ethiopia forward is likely to get a lot of support. So the best he has to do is to strike the iron while it's hot, to make sure those quick gains he can get, he runs them very quickly before, goodwill does not last forever in politics.
Sure. Prof,
Yes.
let me give you the last word. Do you think he has all it takes to change Ethiopia?
Yeah, he's one of these rare characters, personalities you find in history. The Obama as an African American, and at the same time coming at a time when there is need for national integration. Dr. Ahmed is a youth at the age of 42, so he's very young. Two, he's an Oromo, but has relations with the Amhara through his marriage relations. He's a scholar. He has political experience, and he is also a person who understands that Ethiopia needs reconciliatory tone. So he's not thumping his chest that he comes from majority, he's reaching out to the minority. At the same time, he's thriving on a foundation that has already been set by others, Meles and Haile Mariam, in terms of development record of Ethiopia. And therefore, Ethiopia must now be on a takeoff path. And with that, I think Kenya is going to benefit by having a huge market in its neighborhood. And Ethiopia, remember, is also a stabilizing force in the IGAD region, not only because of its numbers, but because of its position from Somalia to Sudan, down to South Sudan and Kenya. So Ethiopia is located in a place where it is a power that can build bridges for the rest of the region.
Thanks a lot, Professor Peter Kagonja, for your input. He is a CEO of Africa Policy Institute, as well as Abiy is a foreign relations expert, as well as Hassan Kuchure, who's a researcher from northern Kenya, as well as southern Ethiopia. Many thanks, gentlemen, for your input. And that brings us to the end of our program tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. But here is, before we wrap up, let me leave you with our proverb of the day. Bye-bye, and enjoy the rest of the night.